here we are. So everyone, welcome. This is Scott Winter with the Collaborative Commons. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Collaborative Commons, really it's a space where people who are doing collaborative work in organizations, communities, schools, what have you, to really share the best around how do we bring people together, how do we learn together. So it's about sharing tools, knowledge, resources, and creating relationships so that we can actually have a greater impact. And today's topic is actually an interesting one because of what's going on around us. I reached out to Emmy about 2 or 3 weeks ago as a result of a question in the comments around what are organizations doing around leadership training or just training in general dealing with mental health. And my good friend Mark Jones recommended that I reach out to you, and you were gracious enough to not only agree to yourself to show up, but also agree for Peter to show up. So we got the best of both worlds here. And today's topic is really about mental wealth, which is a phrase I believe you coined, Peter. And so I don't want to take any more time, but really give you the opportunity to kind of just introduce yourself to the Commons and a little bit about your background and what got you into this space, because I think it's relevant and it's going to probably continue to grow. So who wants to go forward, Peter or Emmy?
I can go first if you like.
Sure.
Mental wealth. Mental wealth as a term and the application that I've put onto it. I've seen other people using mental wealth, but they seem to refer to the ability of the mental ability, their own mental ability. I have a different slant on mental wealth. I think it's more the value that being mentally healthy can bring to organizations. There's a monetary value. There's more productivity, hence there's more wealth produced. So I'm talking about literal wealth, not just mental wealth, that relationship. Now, you ask what brought me to this space. We started looking at workplace mental health simply because we thought, where are people most of the time? Where can we influence people the most? And people spend most of the time at work, especially these days. They seem now they don't even have to be at work. They can be hooked onto work through their mobile phone. So we thought an excellent place to help people is at work. And interestingly, the data shows that the place where people are the most miserable is at work. So I think we're on the right path here. So that's why we are talking about mental wealth at work and not mental wealth inside your head, which is a nice principle. But really, I do believe firmly, and Emmy does too, that there is wealth behind feeling mentally healthy. That's what mental wealth is. Yeah.
Great. Emmy, what about you?
Well, to add to that, for most organizations, one of their biggest costs is people. And so you want to have people performing to their best. And that means they need to be mentally healthy in order for the benefit, not just for them as individuals and teams, but for the organization as well. So for me, my background's as a psychologist, started working in community mental health services, actually working with people with very severe mental health issues and helping them to get out of that sort of difficult space. And that's in a senior management capacity there that, Peter and I saw that we were getting great results, or our teams were getting great results with the clients we worked with, helping them stay out of hospital, helping them move forward in their lives, get jobs, get fulfillment, form relationships, etc. But then we also saw that there was a need to look after the mental health of the staff themselves too. And that sort of fueled the passion for how do we look after everyday people, in all walks of life, who we all go through the ups and downs and challenges from time to time, and how do we help those people stay strong and well. And as Peter said, workplaces, outside of health services necessarily, but just in any industry, wherever there are people, basically, that's where we go and can help provide both the frontline workers, but especially management and senior executive teams with the tools to be able to.
Right. And you guys have been doing this for over 10 years. So, it just seems like in the last couple of years now, we're seeing, in the Bay Area, people doing microdosing, everything to do with the stress levels. And so what were some of the indications or signs that, 10 years ago that you guys saw that now I think people are waking up to around mental health in the workplace?
What we saw in staff is that even in mental health services where we were, even though we were really good at, or we were getting good at applying mental health principles and mental health techniques for clients, there was an assumption that if you were a staff member, you had to be well. And that assumption didn't meet the reality. A lot of the people that we were working with, they were lovely people because they were working in mental health. I guess that's why they were attracted to. But some of them shouldn't have been working in mental health because it was a triggering space. And those that had been working in mental health, it was the wrong assumption to think that because you are trained in this, naturally you're good at it. So we saw that people were highly anxious to perform. They were comparing themselves to each other very much. They were not comparing their own progress, but they were comparing their progress against people next to them, and not in a wise way. They were not comparing their progress or their earnings according to the people that were coming behind them. They're always comparing themselves to people that had more experience, that had more qualifications, that rightly they were ahead of them. And that was causing an existential yearning for more. And there was always this idea of what's next. There was no celebration of the moment. There was no celebration. There was no gratitude for what they had. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because the reason why our clients are clients is because they can't appreciate what is right in front of them. And here we have staff members that are teaching them to appreciate that can't appreciate what is in front of them.
Wow.
So I thought we were sitting on a time bomb then, and Emmy agreed with that, and it was other people agreeing with that too, and we decided, all right, let's tackle this, because this is not going to get better.
Yeah. Emmy?
You see typically in those workplaces, you see stress levels rise, and it can start with just little things. Someone's a bit on edge, or they're a bit negative. They have a little comment here or there, or, a little bit snappy. And then that leads to conflict. And then it leads to, you start to see absenteeism, and then you see burnout, and it kind of escalates. And the interesting thing is, if one person's having that experience, it starts to impact the rest of the team, and then a whole team suffers, and then the end client or customer suffers as well.
Right.
And it was no different in health services than what we've seen subsequently in any other industry as well. And then you add on time pressures. In the last sort of 10 years, we've seen organizations being asked to do more with less. We've a number of organizations we've worked with going through restructure or many restructures, and everybody has new roles. There's uncertainty about whether they'll be able to keep their role. Change within industry. We're always we're seeing people doing the work of 3 jobs, really. What used to be done by 3 people is now done by 1,
right,
within the same time frame and at the same pay somehow. So we're seeing pushback hours kind of extending through the day with people shooting off emails at 5:30 in the morning. I imagine they're waking up at that time and getting straight online, and
and that sends a message if you're a manager and you're doing that. I mean, I definitely work with a lot of leaders. In fact, just this week I was in New York working with a group, and it's interesting because the word manage, right, to manage comes, the origin of the word really is to cope with, right? So the question is, as managers, what am I doing to create the environment to allow my staff to cope more effectively, to be more present, to be able to work through the struggles? And then the other part of that too, and again, I want to ask people in the community, if you're listening, to feel free to ask questions, because I'll be popping them out there to Peter. But the other part too is I've found over the last several months now, kind of doing the work I share with you around the flow science stuff. But one of the things that really struck me is the sense of helplessness that people feel. Like things like, doesn't matter what I say or what I'm going to do, nothing's going to change, which really is a big trigger for stress in the body, probably one of the biggest triggers. And especially now with the coronavirus now impacting, where people are already starting to get laid off, there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and that people really feel helpless. And maybe that's probably why they're buying so much toilet paper, to your point earlier, Peter, right? But how do you help people who are doing work in collaborative spaces where people are feeling this way? what is some guidance that you could provide or have provided organizations to say, where do you give people that power to choose or reclaim their space in their organization?
Well, I'm fond of talking about the two key elements for the formation of a mental health issue, which is helplessness and hopelessness, two of them playing together. They overlap sometimes, but one is, doesn't matter what I do, is not going to work. And there is no hope for the future because it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to work. Right. So if you keep thinking like that, that's not going to take you into a good space. Now we can say, is that exacerbated by work, or does it start at work? In my experience, it's something that people bring into work. And if the manager is not skillful with their mouth, the words that come out, the thoughts themselves comes out into the team, what it does, it makes it worse. And I'll give you an example. In the 80s, we were taught as managers and leaders that it was fantastic to give praise to people. So we're told, you got to tell people how wonderful and how excellent they are. And that's something that is still very pervasive in our world. I see a lot of management doing that. Hey, let's tell them how amazing, how wonderful, how beautiful they are. And I'm not saying they're not. It's that we've learned differently. We have learned that if we tell people they're amazing, they're not going to produce very much because they're amazing and they may stuff it up. Yeah. So that it's actually counterproductive. What is very productive is to tell people exactly what they're doing right. So, John, that report, oh my God, I loved how you did whatever, the punctuation or whatever. And then John goes away and says, got it, I got to do more punctuation. I found something good, I'm going to do better. I can do better. So that's kind of the stuff that is missing in the workplace. We're too trigger happy in the terms of diagnosis and medicating people. They're anxious, let's medicate them. They're depressed, let's medicate them. Oh yeah, and let's give them a diagnosis, the correct diagnosis, because if we don't have it, then it's not gonna work. Well, the news is there is no such thing as the correct diagnosis because it's not a validated science. So we're approaching this really in a wrong way. We need to look at our own behaviors, our own thoughts, our own beliefs that are feeding into the machinery. As managers, I'm talking as managers.
If I can jump in, the other thing is that the other sort of standard response is they're unwell, go home. So take some time off, go home. And it's with great intention, but if that's the sort of standard response, we've got to think about what's the message that we're sending to people. If you're not 100% well and happy, then we don't want you. And, you know, it's unrealistic to think that people are going to perform at 100% all day, every day. You know, we all have our off days. Right. We've got to say, how do we support people to stay productive, to stay at work? Because we know that that's good for well-being. It's good for mental health. How do we encourage people to be able to cope with the off days and the bad days and the stresses and keep going rather than shut down completely when we're not 100%. And just from a purely practical perspective, we know that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health issue every year. Now that's severe enough that it could actually get a diagnosis. There's a whole group of people that might be experiencing stress or distress before it could officially be diagnosed as such. So if we're sending 25% of the workforce home, I mean, that has a massive impact on business as well. So it's much better to learn how do we manage a diverse team of people, you know, diverse in so many ways, and who are all going to have our ups and downs because that's life.
Right.
You know, how do we come together as a team, talking about collaboration, and make work for everyone, you know?
Well, one of the things we talk about in the flow science is the idea of, you know, that there's a cycle to flow, and the first stage of flow is struggle, right? And so what I'm finding is, and I used to have a ropes course company, and I used to always say, hey, struggling or suffering is optional. And I started to realize over the last few years how arrogant that was, because struggling is not an option. It's really, how do we teach people to struggle well? And I think that's the part, is you're talking about those in the moment strategies for an employee. But one of the other things that I've really learned of late is if someone is complaining about a job or a person or something, I'm simply asking the question is, do you like yourself in that situation? Because again, it's not about you. It's really how I'm feeling about me. And it kind of really, that self-awareness piece is probably the greatest gift they can give to themselves, because then they can develop the strategy. Because if I'm waiting for you to change for my life to be better, it's going to be a long, long time. Or I'll see it in some organizations where they will say simply like, I'm just going to wait till Emmy retires, then my life will be better. And then for 10 years until you retire, I'm going to feel like crap. So, again, what are some of the tools that you give to either managers and employees? How often do you bring them together in the same room to really talk about the impact of how one's leadership or communication is creating the environment where people are unable to struggle, or at least not able to kind of express it in a way that they can actually learn from it and grow from it as a team?
Is that a question?
Yeah, well, it's a long diatribe, I know, but I'm always trying to figure this equation out. Yeah, like what's the equation? What's the formula?
What I see happens in practice. The companies that we work with, and we work with sort of from medium-sized through to multinational corporations. And they're all at different stages of this journey. They're all in different places when it comes to their awareness about mental health and well-being and resilience as an issue, how much they've done about it in the past, how much on board the executive teams are in relation to this topic. So you really, where workplace mental health is right now, there's just such a huge spectrum of where organizations are at.
Do you have that continuum defined in terms of like, where's the entry point to like, here's what a mentally wealthy company looks like in terms of behaviors and activities?
Absolutely. It's funny you should mention that, because we talk about it in our book.
Oh, very good. Nice plug.
But we actually, that's why we kind of came up with it, because we got asked that question: what does a mentally healthy or a mentally wealthy workplace look like? And we we did the research and came up with these 7 pillars of a mentally wealthy workplace to really define that. And that can be applied sort of one-on-one at the individual level, or sort of across the whole workplace. But, I guess the most sort of basic starting point is that we will get people who contact us, and, it's terrible when it happens. They say, look, what we always ask, how did you come to us? What's led to this? And they, we will get people who say, well, look, we've just had a massive incident. We've had someone who's had a psychotic episode in the workplace, and we realized we didn't know how to handle it. Or we had someone who took their life, and now we're dealing with, we didn't see it coming, and, we're dealing with the impact of that amongst our workforce. And, oftentimes these people will say, it hadn't even crossed, like we hadn't thought about this before. And so we've just realized that it's this is a thing we need to look at. And, it's such a shame for it to be that, in that case.
Yeah.
The flip side, you get people who say, we want to be proactive. We want to prevent any of this stuff. We've done X, Y, Z, and we want to grow on it. And so there really are some organizations that are completely benchmarking in this area and have really, well thought out, structured programs in place.
On that question, Emmy, on that point, there's a question from Cindy, and thank you, Cindy. The question is, how can we get, my question is, whenever we get to it, is the barriers to having these conversations in the workplace. For example, HR will park these issues in benefits. So for example, we have an employee assistance services. So instead of because I work with a lot of organizations where it's in the federal government, for example, and they're like, well, no, we can't talk about that stuff. And they do refer their coworker out. How do you kind of make it okay to broach the conversation between a manager and an employee around a mental health dynamic that might be an observable behavior, whether it be coming from, my first job was in mental health, and my first boss, my first supervisor, was a bipolar schizophrenic who would self-mutilate. And I got to the point in my relationship with her where I could literally say, are you on your meds? And I will share that story with people, and they're like, oh, I can never have that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, working in mental health, I found how often people needed their own services, a lot of times. So yes, there was a different set of rules, but I'm wondering, how do you approach this? And then the other follow-up question is to get into the 7 pillars of mental wealth or mindset. So that way people can buy the book. So going back to the original question though, it's like, how do we get people to be comfortable with having the conversation around mental health in the workplace? Because it seems to be, we just defer it to the organization that's responsible. It's a benefit you know, and let someone else fix it versus me develop a skill to confront it.
One of the things that we do in our workplace mental health masterclass for leaders is we teach leaders that the default reaction of sending people away, either on leave or to talk to someone else, it's a mistake. As a manager, you need data, you need information. Whenever you send people away, you're sending information away. You're not getting to know that person. You need to be able to have a conversation with that person. You need to be able to know them without providing therapy. That's not your role.
Right.
But you can't just get rid of the person, because then you're not managing an issue. And that seems to make sense to people. I say, yeah, well, that's true. The moment that they go into EAP services, then I have no data. I don't know what's going on, because that's private and confidential. Now I've got a person that is suffering in my team. I don't know how they're going. I've lost complete control. I cannot manage anymore that aspect of it. And that's a problem from a management perspective. So we teach people how to have a conversation that does not go into therapy mode, but it's actually about showing up as a human being, and managing the situation in the short term, making EAP services available, not mandatory. We know from the research, forcing people to talk doesn't work in the long run. It makes things worse. Mm-hmm. So it may make you feel good as a manager to send them away, but that's not. It's mostly counterproductive.
Also, we know the take-up of EAP is traditionally really, really poor. I mean, we're talking 1 or 2% here of a workforce that will actually reach out and access EAP, if they're even aware that their organization has it, because oftentimes we'll go in there and they've never heard, it hasn't been communicated to their people. But typically what we find is HR departments, people and culture departments, they're aware of the need to do more. They understand it, they get it, because they're seeing all the issues brought to their desk, basically, whenever these things kind of they have a tendency to go pear-shaped if they're not handled with the right knowledge and understanding. So they end up being, on HR's desk. So they typically do see the need to do something. And they're sort of the key point to communicate that to the rest of the workforce. One of the things that has been really good is the fact that, in Western countries now, there's legislation that says you have to create a psychologically safe workplace. So that's before we even get to the stage of, oh, now someone's done well and they, hopefully go and get some external professional help. It's, well, you have a responsibility to make sure the environment is psychologically safe to begin with. And there's this requirement, but the legislation doesn't tell managers how to do that. So
and I think that's important, because Well, Peter, as you were talking, I mean, what kind of struck me is the word empathy, right? It's really, how do you build that empathy? And I know that a lot of times in collaboration, we talk about, if you're facilitating, empathy is probably at the heart of collaboration, to really listen, So another question, though, it says, I'm curious about 7 pillars of mental wealth or mindset, or a description of the book. So, Emmy, maybe an overview, and again, where people can get it as a shameless plug, but I think a valuable plug. So what are the 7 pillars?
Oh, wow. How much time have you got?
Yeah. Well, short, like just summary, because we want people to buy the book. So
one of them is, we start off with this foundation of this idea that this is not other people that we're talking about. There's been this sort of traditional tendency to talk about other people when they become unwell. What do we do with them? And first of all, it's about recognizing that this is us we're talking about. This is us. This is a human experience. It's, as I said, 1 in 4 every year. But when you look at lifetime stats, we're looking around 50% of the population will go through something at some point in their life. And
just on that point, though, on that point, people that are willing to report that they have an issue, you know what I mean? Because I do think that those numbers are skewed, especially probably more so for men who are willing to report that, hey, I'm freaked out right now and I don't want to do it, but I can't demonstrate it. So I think those numbers are actually probably higher.
Exactly.
Well, we
say we're all crazy. It's just a matter of degrees. It depends what day you catch us on. We've all got our stuff. We're all human. We're not robots. We have feelings. And
Right.
so where those feelings are going to go up and down and sideways from time to time. So this is all of us. So one of the pillars is about recognizing that, and first and foremost, making sure that we're, addressing all of that stigma internally. For me, if I'm a manager, that I don't have any of that sort of going on first and foremost. But, yeah.
And it should be okay if you do, though. So, Peter, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that it's a very good comment that you make, Scott, because the research is showing again and again and again that 50% of people that are severe enough that could be diagnosed with a mental health issue if they went to a doctor actually never tell their boss. So this is an issue. When you have 50% of potential staff with problems in your workforce that will not tell you they have a problem, that is impacting in absenteeism, presenteeism, loss of reputational risk, loss of productivity. This is a huge problem for management. And some management react, say, well, why don't we create a really strong filter in the interview process so we keep them out? I've got news for you. They're already inside, and they're not telling you. So it's wise for management.
And
it could be
week,
you, yeah. You could be there. That's very easy to do, isn't it? Everybody else is
just
crazy except me.
Yeah.
So
when I say none of that going on, I mean none of the stigma.
Right. So, Emmy, when you said, so that first one, it says like that self-awareness piece of like and I think in that self-awareness is an acceptance that, hey, I'm going to struggle at some point mentally, and I need to know that what are the strategies to struggle well. So that first pillar, it sounds to me as you're describing, is that element of just self-ownership, self-accountability, self-awareness. What are the other...
And the willingness to have the conversation, because then they can learn the skills and the strategies to do that effectively.
Right.
So,
and that gets them out of that being stuck and helpless, though, too, or hopeless. It's like, wow, I'm stuck here. I know that I have some people close to me that are dealing with some severe depression, and it's really been amazing where they can talk about anything that might be impacting, but when it comes to talking about mental health, and these are really smart people, they clam up because they feel so afraid that they might be tagged as unwell or weak or what have you. And it's like, man, we've got to destigmatize this issue because we need it. Because I think more and more people are having. Just on Monday, I was in New York, and right as the crisis, the first meltdown in the Wall Street was happening, this one guy said, man, I'm really struggling. I deal with anxiety. And all of a sudden he gets triggered when we shut down the stock market for 15 minutes. It just seeing his affect completely change and not having the strategy to get through it. So that self-acceptance in this process is really important too.
And this is why those workplaces and those individuals who have, prepared their resilience before a crisis hits, before something happens, if you've got the skills and strategies and you've practiced them and you practice them regularly, then you can be in a better position. It doesn't make you 100% immune, but as an organization, it prepares people that they can reference that when something does happen.
Is that one of the pillars?
Life is going to throw us things.
Yeah. Is that one of your pillars as well?
Yeah, that's pillar number 7 is wraparound strategies. It's not just about how do we respond. And you definitely need to know how to respond when people do become unwell and how do you have those conversations. But the flip side is how do we, as an organization, build a team of people that are in the best possible position to face challenges that work and life bring. And, and the managers are so key. It's so key because they've just got that, not only the hierarchical authority, but they've got that sphere of influence to a much broader space. So
I like to use the word immunity for it. I mean, it's not completely 100% correct, but how do we immunize our staff for future problems? How do we create a herd immunity here to the degree that is possible so we can actually make sure that if it hits us later, people are going to be anxious because that's a normal response, but it doesn't have to be so severe that they think of suicide. What about if we can keep it mild? We can only do that if the muscle is strong already. That's the only way to lift the weight. And guess what? It's going to happen. It's called life. So something is going to happen in the future that is going to catch us by surprise. We better be ready to a certain degree for that surprise.
Well, I think that's happening now. I mean, with the coronavirus, there's a definite trigger happening. And so, a couple of questions that have popped up is related to, and again, I don't know if we got through all the pillars, Faye, but definitely it sounds like there's at least two about resiliency, and as terms of preparing for stuff, that would be probably on the higher level of awareness versus just the creating new self-awareness is probably on another juncture. But I want to kind of move on to some of the other questions. So then how do you, one of the questions is we often hear the term toxic cultures. So what are the competencies required of managers to turn that around? So if it's if hopefully the manager is well aware that maybe they might be the reason why there's a toxic culture. So if they're part of the problem, how do they shift out of that as a dynamic?
Well, a key principle for recovery from mental health problems applies here, and that is self-responsibility. Is about the ability to take ownership of what's going on. Yeah, sure, other people and other events may be impacting. They always are. There's always an impact from the external, but the internal, how you react to things, whether you take responsibility and say, well, it might not be my fault, but what can I do? Am I being part of the problem? And that is the beginning of a solution there. So responsibility is key in this space.
Another question here is, so around a taboo dealing with addiction. So one of the participants, I'm trying to get into companies to speak more about addiction. Any recommendations for how to approach this? And I guess I'd like to go a little bit deeper. Is what I found is that some people bring up addiction because they're talking about their kids, but it might be themselves. So there's a little bit of projection. So a little more clarity, Cindy, is that really about how we talk about addiction within people who are suffering from addiction in the place of work? I'm assuming so I see it's coming down here. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Cindy. So how do you approach the topic of addiction as a topic? Because again, addiction is a symptom of trauma and other things. So how do you bring that into the equation? Because it's also a coping skill for some folks.
With great difficulty, because addiction is one of those aspects for most people that are addicts, until their life really starts falling apart, they will not acknowledge that they have a problem. So it is, I mean, I always say, if you're thinking of building a business on helping people with addiction, you're going to have a hard time. It's not going to be an easy business to take off the ground, because addicts in their own mind don't have a problem until everything falls apart and they have to take some ownership. So it's going to be hard. Now, everybody else may see very easily that the addict has got an addiction, but society is not always willing to help out and to make a point. Now, but sometimes the only way to approach this subject with a person is to actually point not to your opinion as to what's going on, but say, hey. Sally, did you realize that last night you were dancing on top of the tables, completely drunk? Do you remember that bit?
Yeah.
No, I do not remember that bit at all. Yeah. So that is a difficult one. But pointing to the behaviors that have been seen by yourself, that's a start.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was working with a copper refiner of mine, it's probably 20 years ago, and we were doing culture work, and they actually did a team intervention where all of his colleagues brought him into a meeting and sat a chair down, and they said, man, we love you, we care about you, but our lives are in danger when you come to work drunk. And the guy just kind of really just kind of exposed all of his pain. And it was a really amazing, the HR director, and it was because we were doing this collaborative type of work and creating cultures of compassion, and it was phenomenal that changed that guy's life and everyone. But it goes back to, I think, Emmy, what you were saying, that the ability to make it safe to talk about it, where all these people said, we love you, and we care about you, and you got to get your crap together because we don't want to be injured because of your poor choices. So it was a huge intervention.
That's incredible. And what I always say to people is that has to be done so carefully. Make sure you get the experts to assist with that process, because I've seen a lot of people kind of wing it and it can go really poorly too. So it sounds like there was some really good guidance there to make that work so effectively, and that's critical.
Yeah, so I'm going to another question here. So one is from Marie, how beneficial one-on-one meetings are, or performance appraisal to people to let them know how they're doing and provide that feedback they need. I've seen organizations not do one-on-ones or take performance appraisal seriously. And I feel as if that's where employees stress of not knowing where their path forward or how they are actually doing in a company. I think this goes back to that feedback component, but how do you feel, and when is the appropriate time? Because I don't think you would have kind of a mental health conversation and a performance conversation. When do you bring it up in a one-on-one context?
Yeah. So this is actually one of the things we teach in the masterclass is how to have, both of those conversations. And we recommend that they are separate conversations, but so often what happens is the two get intertwined together, either by the manager or, the person who's going through something difficult might start to bring that into the performance topic, and the two issues get intertwined, and it makes it really hard to handle. So that's one of the things we teach is how do you tease those two apart and deal with them both effectively. It might be within the same physical discussion within the same time period, but as a manager, you need to be able to think of them as two discrete sort of topics. And but the other thing is that idea, how important is it? It's super important. We talk about having the "we are okay" conversation, regularly because people, as soon as there's someone in a position of, power because of their role as a manager, as a superior, people start to get worried. They start to get concerned about, the relationship with that person. So it's really important to be getting that feedback, on a regular basis. It will vary depending on the person and the situation as to how much that's needed.
It's interesting. There's a data point somewhere. I teach a class on feedback, and two data points that really stick out for me is something around, less than 30% of the workforce feel engaged, right? And then the other correlating kind of factor, and I don't know if it's really connected, but I think there probably is, but less than 30% feel that they get adequate feedback. So to your point earlier, Peter, around it's not just you're doing a good job, but hey, here's the behavior, here's the impact. So then you get that dopamine hit. So they're saying, oh, it's this behavior that's leading to things, and that creates clarity, and that gets affirmed from a chemical perspective. So I totally see that disconnect. We always say even sometimes bad feedback with good intent is better than no feedback at all, right? So it's the intent behind it. Sometimes we got to work on delivery. A couple more questions there. Actually, we're getting quite a few, so this is awesome. Yes. Peter, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say to Marie, one of the problems that I've seen with performance appraisals is that they follow a very rigid format. So sometimes people, what they do is they follow this format and they haven't dealt with anything because they're just answering questions. And I've seen it very often, people pass a performance appraisal with glowing colors, and 2 weeks later they're actually fired. And you think, how did that happen? How was that not picked up? Simply because they followed a form. And that's the problem with some of these these processes and organizations. They're not fluid enough, and they don't go to the heart of the matter.
Great. So Rodi, I'm going to hold on for your question, because Rodi's question is really related to the pandemic, and maybe we'll end with that one around just some techniques to address that. I'm going to move on to Tim. The question from Tim: what advice would you give a company when they discover that a particular leader or manager is damaging the staff's mental health? So I'm assuming you've probably been called in to address that. Yeah.
Very, very good. Yeah, I would say stop and breathe. Stop and breathe, because that is a very, very, very easily abusable term. Somebody's damaging my mental health. Exactly how? How is that happening? Is it because they don't like a red hat that I wear on Monday mornings, or is there a true basis for that? And then don't have that conversation by yourself. One of the things that we teach in one of the pillars is nothing about me without me. Bring that person in and say, hey, listen, we've seen you do this, and we're concerned that this is upsetting people.
Nothing about me without me. I like that. That's kind of like
about me without me. It's one of the pillars. So have that conversation with the person. People should not be surprised at any point. They should know what's going on. It's their life, because it's easy to say, oh, you are damaging people's mental health. But I come from a philosophy that everyone's mental health is important. Even a so-called perpetrator, they may not know what they're doing. How are they doing that? They may be completely oblivious, and it just may be that they have a habit that is different. And that could be upsetting people, but they may not know that they're doing it. They may have a really good heart. In my experience, most people have a good heart.
Well, they're probably struggling too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're probably at their limit, and it's that communication and compassion. You know, the antidote to fear is compassion, and being able to create those. We're social beings. We need to manage our social relationships through communication.
Yeah, one of the things that I share when the groups that I'm working with is the idea that hurt people hurt people. Like if there's a behavior that's coming out that's a bit destructive, there's something behind the behavior. And so again, to your point around being compassion, find out, ask what's going on, and maybe the first point to your point earlier, Peter, around that empathy, because I think when I was working with Regina, what I did was I realized that for me, that the most difficult people in my lives, I turn them into my teachers. So instead of me attacking, I just said, what can I learn from this experience that's going to help me be better with this person, right? So clearly I have not mastered it, but I think what I was experiencing especially when I was dealing with someone with a really severe, emotionally disturbed, dynamic, was I started to question my own abilities. I started to think that I was the crazy one because I could get through to them, because I was trying to your point, trying to convince them that I was okay versus trying to understand where they were coming from. And that's when she really opened up around her own mental health issues and stuff. So it's such a delicate dance, but I turn the folks that are challenging into my teachers as a way to kind of cope with my own inabilities to get through. So I just shut up and listen. So it works better that way.
Always a good idea.
Good
yes.
strategy.
Yeah. So another question here, Laura asks, how do you see online and or technology, e-phones, as a tool or vehicle to support your work? Like, how are you using any technology as a way to kind of support, outside of your live stuff with people?
Well, absolutely. Look what we're doing here now. We're having a global meeting of sorts, and it would not be possible without the technology. I mean, this is brilliant. We can share ideas. We can collaborate. We can support people that are not in the same room. We can bring expertise to the masses that was not previously available. Unless Scott was my neighbor or worked in the same place, we would never have met Scott. Look at what technology is allowing. So that's brilliant. Now,
do you have any apps or anything that you guys use?
No, we don't have apps.
Okay.
The reason why we chose not to, just in case, because that's a good question. We chose not to is because there's so many apps that it's a very competitive market, and most people start using it, and unless it's a highly social app or it's a very, very good game, most people tend to drop them. I'm not against them. I love apps, but I just thought that that's not going to work in our case.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
you also have to choose your app carefully.
Yeah.
You do have to choose them carefully, because there's some, I have a concern, there's some that are very much focused on monitoring our well-being to excess sometimes.
Right.
So, if every day I'm checking in, well, how anxious do I feel today? And I start looking for anxiety in my body, I'm going to find it. And then if I do the same thing 3 hours from now, it's like, how anxious am I feeling now? Oh gosh, even more anxious. And so we can actually create exactly what we're trying to avoid when we get into this space. So it's really careful that there's a great understanding of the psychology behind any sort of mental health and well-being app, that it's going to achieve the results that we're looking for, rather than create a focus on what we don't want and what the negative part of it is.
Right. What are your thoughts? Another question again from Laura. We'll get to the book at the very end too, Emiliano. What are your thoughts about meditation as strategies, and do you integrate that into your practice and teachings as well?
Meditation. I'll just give you a quick example. I do not know any high performer that either doesn't meditate or pray. They do one or the other. Billionaires around the world, they either meditate or pray. So there's always some kind of way of providing the neurology a micro break of sorts. So our brain, our neurology, our brain needs to have a recovery moment. And that cannot be done without a moment of mindfulness. So what meditation does is triggers mindfulness. And then that provides a recovery space. It's a it doesn't have to be very long. This is the mistake that most people do. They think 4 hours of meditation is better than 2 or a second. The truth is that the brain can recover in a microsecond if you give it the chance. So yeah, brilliant. Meditation is great, but the building block of meditation, mindfulness, is even better.
Great. Yeah, Emmy?
I'm also aware that in workplaces, there's going to be some people that it doesn't resonate for them for whatever reason. So we always make sure that we're coming at mental health and well-being from a number of different angles and perspectives. And you know, you need to provide people with a range of tools so that they can find what works best for them.
Right.
We're all human, but we're all unique and different too.
Right. Well, and I think it also means that going back to not comparing your approach to your own mental health with other people's approach to the mental health, because I do think that comparing yourself to others is one of the greatest causes of unhappiness in our culture, you know, and that's why the whole idea of social media doing away with likes and things like that is as a way to kind of keep these young women, you know, especially young girls, 13-year-olds, have a high level of depression. So anyway, let's kind of pivot a little bit, because I do want to talk about the younger generation a bit. I was just working with a university a few weeks ago around stress mastery. These were people going off to their internships, and it was really alarming how many of them came up to me during breaks to just say, they were very open and transparent about it. So this question comes up is, do you see any generational mismatches in points of view? Do the leaders you work with have an awareness of how much anxiety is prevalent among young workers of the workforce? And the reason why I ask that, because I'm seeing there's such a high level of anxiety in our younger generation that if they're not given the tools, they will move into the workplace and get into the depressive episodes because they just haven't had that skills and the context and the adulting that has to go on with going into the workforce starts to create that, again, helpless dynamic. So what do you see happening in those generational components?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we forget is how special youth is, but how much nurturing they need. And the society that we have created, it's a wonderful, in many ways, society that protects people, coddles them, it nurtures them to a degree, and yet emotionally, we are failing young people emotionally. And I think it's just because we're all so busy that we, at the end of the day, parents, which have become the primary carers or the primarily responsible for the emotional well-being of youth, that's a modern phenomena. It wasn't like that 100 years ago. It was a whole community taking care of people's needs, but now 2 people are responsible for that emotional nurturing, and they're exhausted at the end of the day. So we have created a very intense, complex world that at the same time is so comfortable in a material sense. And our young people are not learning necessarily the lessons on how to deal with struggle that they need guidance with, that you were talking about, Scott. So that's what I see. It's a problem. And when you add the natural arrogance of being young, I'll give you an example. My 3-year-old was arguing with me how to brush teeth properly. He didn't know how to do it, but he was arguing with me about the technique. And he was completely right in his mind, you know. So that's a natural thing for a human being. We are arrogant and we don't even realize we are. But that's with the arrogance of youth. And then there's a sense of entitlement because they don't have to wait for anything. So that's very difficult. As I say, I love our youth, but we are losing the plot. And it's not the young people that is losing the plot. I think it's society. We are losing the plot in terms of nurturing young people.
I do see an older, more traditional, generation who, and it's not everyone, obviously, we're talking sort of generalizations here, but one of the things that I commonly see in workplace dynamics is there'll be a group of people that says, well, so you're feeling stressed, well, toughen up, take a spoonful of cement, harden up, get over it.
Right.
And it completely misses the mark. Like, it's never going to work to say that to someone who's coming from a completely different mindset about this sort of thing. So they're shooting themselves in the foot by having that sort of that tough approach that's too harsh. And then you've got the other side of the equation, which is the people in the workplace, and generally speaking, more the younger generations that are too far the other way. Anything goes, it's all right, take as much time as you need, you don't feel like working today, that's all right, don't worry about it. And that doesn't really get the job done either. That doesn't strengthen or build capacity or resilience. So where we come in is about saying, well, how do we get that balance right, where we're, you know, supportive and compassionate and empathetic, but we're also supporting people to be more capable, and both physically in terms of their jobs and their roles, but also emotionally capable as well. And so there's a process to that. You can't just come in and say, well, toughen up. It doesn't work.
Right.
And the other side of the coin is that we need, as people, we need to learn to cherish struggle. Struggle is good for us. Pain is good for us. It makes us grow. But we need to have the network that supports us through that struggle. So internal network and external network.
So what does that look like? What is that, when you say it needs the network, what is encompassing? Because I think of like top down and bottom up strategies from a neural perspective, but what, can you give an outline of how to create a structure for that? Yeah.
The most simple one is to understand, you know, to make sure that people know that pain and struggle is normal.
Right.
Like we at the moment in Western society, we have this idea that anything that upsets me has to be bad for me. That couldn't be further from the truth. You know, it just means you're upset. You know, it just may mean that you're just not mature enough not to be upset. You know, so we need to cherish struggle. When I struggle, I have a window of opportunity to learn about me and how I do struggle. I can complain about everybody else, but I should not miss that window of opportunity. Yeah. Now, managers and parents, we need to do the same thing. We need to say, yeah, that was hard, but you made it, you know, and it's normal. It's hard. If you do something the first time, you're gonna suck at it. It's normal. Be ready to suck, but learn from your sucking.
Yeah, we call it embrace the suck. Yeah, embrace it.
Embrace the suck.
Yeah,
you know, because there's no other way. There's no other way. But this is this expectation that if I suck and I feel a little bit bad, everybody should stop the world and somehow correct the sucking. No. We need to, as managers, as parents, as people in authority, we need to help people understand that struggle is good. Extreme struggle, where I lose it, is not good. We also need to put a cap on that, but we need to face pain. It's like exercising a muscle.
Right. Well, it goes back to what Emmy, you were saying a little while ago around preparing for the hardship. So I do a lot of post-mortem or pre-mortems actually. So before we get into a particular initiative, I will literally say, how might this, you know, what might derail us? What, you know, how might we, you know, we suck as a result by not anticipating the bad. And there is some science to suggest that when you anticipate the bad and you anticipate the suck, your brain can actually adapt more quickly. It doesn't mean it's any easier, but at least you've thought about options. Again, you're not in that hopeless because you've considered it. I do work with the U.S. Before the games, we do we call it the functional area team training, where we're really just getting them ready for all the things that could possibly go wrong. So each team's ready when they get together, because if they get triggered and they get stressed out, it's going to implode on their team dynamic. So that awareness is such a key component to being better at bracing the suck. Is just anticipate it. Don't dwell on it. Don't be Chicken Little, but rather, hey, this could happen. And if this does, I have some options. So it's a good strategy for that. For sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the end of the world. There are some options. I can choose. I can pre-choose which way I'm going to go. Yeah. So when it happens, and something will happen, when it happens, I know what to do next. There's a next.
And it also takes away the fear and stress now, because I've dealt with that now. I've got a plan, so I can let it go and be in the moment and do what I need to do now.
Great. So I have a few more questions here, and I'm going to wrap with the one that Rodi asked related to the current context. So this is from Mark. Having worked with you guys before, the key to our team's success as mentors was follow-up coaching sessions. So you yet established a formal framework. So have you set a formal framework, path to assist managers, et cetera, to continue developing their mental health, wealth, awareness skills? So what's the roadmap that you take folks who go through an experience of learning about mental health in the workplace? What does that system look like for supporting both the internal system, but the external system? What's your system look like?
Customized to where the organization is at any particular point in time.
So depending upon their continuum of care, what they need. Okay.
Depending on where they're at, what's going on, then there's a series of things, because you don't want to come in. If a team's in severe distress, you need to deal with that, for example. You can't just ignore that and pretend like everything's fine and we're going to do so. So it really, really has to be customized. But there are certain elements that have to be included. One of the things that we think is really important for organizations is to do a thorough assessment of where are we at, because most companies don't know. There may be one or two key individuals who have a sense, but a lot of the time they don't have the data. And they'll oftentimes be saying, oh, we're all good here, we're fine, our workforce is great. And then when you scratch the surface a little bit, you find actually there's more going on here than you thought.
Yeah. Do you guys have an assessment that you guys use?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what are
EWS 16?
EWS 16, is that something you all created?
Yes, we did create it. It's actually very good, even if I say so myself. It's been put together from validated tools, and at the same time respecting the 7 pillars and the principles for recovery that we know work. So it makes sure that we actually get a good picture of the real psychological state of an organization without avoiding leading people, because there's a lot of tools out there that actually look for depression, and then if you look for something, you'll find it.
Right.
So yeah, it's a fairly exhaustive assessment, but it can be done online very easily by people. It's not hard to understand. So,
anonymously.
Yeah.
And anonymously, so it meets those things.
And then the other piece that's really, really critical is making sure you've got the executives, the senior leadership team on board. And so that's a really important piece that, sometimes that's a challenge because they either don't necessarily value it, or they don't, or they think they know it already. So, but making sure that we have that opportunity to make sure that they're all together on the same page with a good understanding of where we're going with this and why we're doing things a certain way.
How would you go about, and this is my question, but the idea of destigmatizing this whole topic? I mean, what are those? I mean, I know it's probably in your book a little bit. We've talked a little bit about here in some of these conversations, but if there was 1 to 3 to 5 steps that to say, first step is what? To really, let's not stigmatize what we're talking about here, to make it more, just more acceptable. I mean, like you said, we're all going to struggle, Peter. And so how do we get people to just accept?
Stigma it's a hard thing, Scott. I mean, if you walk into a room and someone doesn't like you, do they like you because you have a mental health issue, or because you're just too beautiful, or you're just too smart, or they simply, you remind them of an old boyfriend? You don't know. You don't know. So that it's a hard one, because I see a lot of people saying they have stigma because I have mental health issues. Well, do they? You don't know. Is it a case? I've seen a lot of cases in this space of self-stigmatizing. A lot of people with mental health issues that blame everything on their mental health. That's self-stigmatizing. So they're trying to remove stigma, while at the same time they carry the stigma themselves. Then there's the other aspect. Can we talk? This is, I think, a better question for me. Is it okay? Do we have a space in our organization where if I'm feeling anxious, I can actually say it out loud, and people won't overreact, or people will not either completely ignore it, or we can have a conversation as to what's really bothering me, and then we can act on it. I think that's a better question. Can we have that conversation? But we shouldn't have to have that conversation in order for the whole of society to feel that stigma has been removed either. Right. I don't think having that conversation in every moment is productive. For example, if you're in the front line in a war, would it be a good time to talk about your anxiety? It's not a good time,
right.
or it would be counterproductive. Now, we're not in a war, but in many senses, there are times when you can talk about your anxiety, and there are other times not. I mean, if you're in a board meeting in which you're selling a high-level product to your clients, if you're not anxious, I'd be surprised.
Right. I
Doesn't
know
mean that you have a problem.
Yeah, I know that one of the strategies that I use when I'm working with individuals is to tell me everything that's coming. Like when I'm coaching, we call it clearing the space. Like tell them everything you're coming into this meeting with,
That's great.
and what are you leaving to after this meeting with, so they can actually, because they found that it tempers the amygdala, so you can actually focus from the brain-based perspective. But I want to circle back to the question that Rodi had asked, and this kind of is about the timing of the epidemic and any advice or guidance you might have. It says, in your experience working with organizations, what have you seen effective managers, leaders, or organizations do to manage, cope with stress, to get their staff organized to the other side of a pandemic or epidemic? Curious about techniques that you guys have seen managers exercise in the short term and long term to get themselves and their staff through heightened stressful times. Like I think we're all facing that right now. This kind of existential dynamic. So any tips that you might be willing, other than you said it a moment ago, talking about it is one, but any others?
Talk about the elephant in the room is the number one, and have transparency. We talk about the importance of transparency in one of our pillars. This idea that if you're a team, the team should know what's going on, and don't make them wait for it. Make sure that you talk about things as they happen. We're talking about non-confidential things, of course, and that goes a long way to appease people. Talk to them about plan B. So this is what's happening. If plan A doesn't work, we have plan B, and plan B would this be. And this is how we're going to react. This is how, I mean, recently I sent out an email to my staff talking about the coronavirus and how they impact the business. But I didn't leave them hanging. I said to them, well, this is what's happening. And this is what my plan is. This is our plan. This is our plan of action. And that becomes inspirational when you do that. Because this is usually what happens in this space. Managers manage, but they forget to be inspirational. And in times like this, you need to be inspirational, but at the same time, have a plan and explain what your plan is.
Great.
And that goes a long way.
They have to be in a good, solid space themselves. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
No. They have to be aware of that. They have to stay calm themselves to be able to provide that for their team as well. I mean, if people are looking to leadership in this time, and this is the time to be a leader, and that means that all that emotional intelligence, it means how do we, the antidote to fear is what can we control, and that's where the plan B comes in place.
Right. Well, it goes, and one of the things I was going to say, one of the things we say in this, I'm sorry, Peter, but the one thing I was going to say is you name it to tame it is the saying that we kind of use. I've never done the panel this way, so I appreciate the fact that people are being patient where they're talking over each other. But, how do we, I think making it comfortable to name what's in the room, to your point, the elephant in the room. And I know if I'm a manager, I'd be saying, hey, I have some concerns, and I'm assuming some of you all do. So let's be real and human again. I think, but it's always so funny how it takes a crisis for humanity to show up. And yet our survival is predicated on our ability to connect. And I think part of my reason why I think there's such high anxiety and mental health issues is people haven't been connecting because we've been so distracted. So some really basic strategies. I'm seeing some lovely posts out there on the internet around just the importance to really come together and be compassionate. So so I'm sorry, Peter, for talking over you. What were you going to add? I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I was talking over you. We were both chatting at the same time, so I apologize. And I was just going to say, be practical. Be practical as a leader. A leader is always practical. Be inspirational, but at the same time, be practical. Do they have what they need to do their job? Do they have it? Do they have what they need to face the epidemic? Are reasonable measures being taken? If you need masks, do they have masks in their job? If they need gloves, do they have gloves? Should you go out and buy some? Make sure that you're very, very practical in the things that you can control. And then make sure that you're very inspirational in the emotional needs. And then make sure that you're a brilliant genius when it comes to plan Bs and plan As, because there will be questions. And if all those three come together, then your team will follow you.
Well, the other part of that equation too, I know in working in the trust space, that if your employees trust you, even if you don't know, and you say, hey, at this point, I don't have an answer to that question, but let me get back to you in an hour or two, that in of itself will also, because they know that you've had a track record with them and that you're looking out for them, but that also allows them to kind of calm down because they can let that worry off their plate because they've shared it with you and you're willing to go look for it. So there are little social contracts. And I'm just curious, again, if you're to kind of, if the chapters in your book, could you just give me a sense of what those chapters look like and not getting into details? And hold it up again, because I think people were curious about the name of it as well. So it's called An Essential Guide to Workplace Mental Health and Wellness, or Well-Being, excuse me.
So it's divided into 2 parts. The first part is all about workplace mental health in general, what the current situation is globally, some of the issues, how it's being dealt with well and not so well, the manager's role. And then the second part is those 7 pillars to a mentally wealthy workplace. So we talked about this idea of we, not you, we're all in this together, reducing the stigma, organizational plasticity and flexibility, nothing about me without me, Peter mentioned.
Love that.
Total integration, a mutual responsibility, understanding complexity, and we spoke a little bit about wraparound strategies as well. It's not just responsive and reactive, it's the prevention side as well, which, with this pandemic going on at the moment, those that have prevented will be in a much better place to cope going forward.
Yeah. Is there any final advice that you guys could give to us beyond what you've shared? And mostly what, I guess for me, I'm asking the question from my filter is, over the last 10 years, what have you guys learned in terms of kind of the key themes or trends that you see emerging? Because at your website, if people have the opportunity to go see your website, you have this picture of the tsunami, right? What are some of the trends that we need to be aware of to really, to your point, Emmy, to prepare for, again, more potential crises or dynamics? Not that I'm going to get fixated on it and, never leave my room, but really be proactive as a leader, as a facilitator, as someone who does this work. What do I need to be aware of?
First of all, awareness alone is not enough. When 10 years ago, when we started, it was all about mental health awareness and let's get people aware that this is a topic. We need to move beyond that. And some organizations are to really building the skills, those concrete communication skills around mental health specifically, and to be able to come at that from different perspectives. So moving beyond awareness to actual skills building is a key thing that I've seen come over the last 10 years. Peter?
The other thing I would say, as a leader, make sure that your own room up here is clean. If it's not, it's going to come out really bad out here. Most people are not aware of the impact the choice of words is having on other people. Well, that's okay if you're a frontline person or you're just anyone, that's fine. If you're a leader, that's highly important. You need to learn to talk properly. And in order to do that, you need to learn to think properly. You need to be aware of the power of words and how they impact on other people, and the power of the right question. If you ask somebody how badly are you feeling today, that's a bad question.
Right.
If you meet someone that has got problems with emotions, maybe a better thing to say is, hey, isn't it a beautiful day today? It's beautiful, sunny. Have you noticed how the sun is shining through the window? That's leadership.
Right. As you were talking about that, I'm going to go back to what Marie was asking a while ago. What I found sometimes too in those one-on-one sessions, especially if it's going to be around a dynamic where it's dealing with someone's, if you're concerned for somebody, take them on a walk. Because I found that if you get them out of the office in nature, talking about stuff, it just opens them up. And because they're moving and you got their physiology engaged, that it just changes all the rules that they have around the office space, like get out, go for a walk. Because I've seen managers really apply some poor strategies. Well, you come into my office, Peter, I'll be like, hey, so how's it going? And what you're going to tell me is, I'm fine. Exactly. So
let me tell you about what happened.
Yeah. So it's like, so I see the need for the skill sets, and it's so interesting because I think a lot of people. Here's the other part of my question though too. So people know this stuff. I mean, a lot of managers do know a lot of this stuff. What keeps from actually applying it? Because I teach these communication classes.
Addiction.
Speak more. What do you mean?
Addiction to drama. We talk about it in the Workplace Mental Health Masterclass. Addiction to drama. We are attracted. I think this is a true addiction. This is the number one addiction of human beings. We're attracted to negativity. We're attracted to something going wrong. We're attracted to what do we call news? We don't call news something nice. We call it, if it's a pandemic. Oh boy, do we love pandemics. Everybody will listen to a pandemic. Nobody will listen to, oh, I had a wonderful day. What a boring guy. You didn't tell me anything there. So we're addicted to drama. This is the number one problem that we have. But as leaders, we can't afford that. We need to break that cycle. And
so, Emmy, you were talking a little bit about this around, I think before that we started recording, just about people's behavior, and a lot of it's tied to that fear. And again, there's a neurobiological reason. I mean, we have 4 or 5 times more circuitry looking for negative, just from our basic primal brain. So how do we get people unstuck? And again, that fear base, and again, any other tips for the people that are going to be navigating over the next few weeks with this coronavirus stuff?
Yeah, the idea is we're programmed for survival, So we're programmed to look for negative. And, one of the things we talk about is that, draws from the field of positive psychology. And I don't want to, it can become very simplified sometimes. It's not just about thinking positive. There's much, much, much more to it. But that being able to be aware of our thought patterns, so we can interrupt that sort of a primal emotional response and recognize that it's going to be there, and that's okay, and that's normal and human. But we can now step up into another part of our brain, the executive functioning, and start to use all the logic and the ration that we also have as human beings. That's what's helped us to become so evolved. So there's a lot of different sort of cognitive strategies. There's the meditation and mindfulness that you've talked about. There's recognizing that we're social beings, where we put our focus. We're inundated with all this information at the moment, but choosing how much of it we really want to take in. It's not just about getting the facts. So I see a lot of people out there talking about, well, get the facts. But if you spend all day reading the facts, even if they're positive, you've just spent all day focused on this virus and pandemic instead of the rest of your life. Life can still continue, we've still got all the other aspects of our life. So being selective about how much and what information we want to take in and we want to share.
Great. So finally, how can people get a hold of you?
Emmy?
So our website, www.WMHI, Workplace Mental Health Institute.com.
Is it .au as well, or just?
We have both. So you can go, we're global. We have people around the world, so we've got facilitators in the UK, in the USA, Canada, Asia, and Australia, where we started. So we've got people everywhere. So go to .com or .com.au, whichever you like. If you Google mental wealth, is available on Amazon. And there's links back to us there as well. There's Facebook, there's LinkedIn, we're everywhere.
Well, I want to say thank you to both of you for the time, and everyone who took the time this afternoon to join and morning in California, because this is a really big topic. I will be sending the recording out to everybody. And again, spread the word, because we got to heal as a country, as a community, as a culture, as a world, because I think the challenge is, I interviewed a colleague of mine a few weeks ago, and I said, we're going to continue to be confronted with these existential crises. And if we're not solid ourselves, it's going to be harder to lead people out of it. Not that it's my job, but I can at least help people feel okay with being uncomfortable and helping them struggle. So
thank you very much for inviting us, Scott.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, I really
about mental health.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I feel mentally wealthier as a result. So I really appreciate it. And looking forward to getting the recording out to everybody, and looking forward to staying connected with you guys.
Right. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you very much for listening to us. Bye-bye.
Bye.